For many libraries, grants are an important and vital resource, but the process of applying for, grant seeking, grant writing can be frustrating and intimidating. Our presenters today hope to, 1, leave you with a better understanding of federal funding sources that are available to libraries like yours, and 2, equip you with tips and helpful information on searching, identifying, and applying for federal grants. So we're going to get started now with Tracy, who's going to give you a brief overview of the National Arts and Humanities Youth Program Awards application and its eligibility criteria. Tracy, it's your turn.
Great Steele from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So we'll have 2 perspectives from that agency. So let me jump in. I just wanted to provide a program overview. The National Arts and Humanities Youth Program Awards is the nation's highest honor for the field of out-of-school time arts and humanities programs, particularly those that reach young people with tremendous potential but limited opportunities. It is a signature initiative of the President's Committee on the Arts and the Humanities in partnership with the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Each year, the National Arts and Humanities Youth Program Awards recognize 12 outstanding programs in the United States from a wide range of urban and rural settings that showcase cultural excellence and enhance the availability of out-of-school time arts and humanities programs that reach children and young people. The programs that receive the award are considered to be creative youth development programs. Now, who wins and why? The awards recognize and support outstanding creative youth development programs that lay new pathways to creativity, self-expression, and achievement, all outside of the regular school day. These programs excite and engage a range of students, cultivating imagination, collaboration, discipline, and academic success, all with demonstrable results. They also provide safe harbors during those times when young people are most vulnerable, in the summer, those hours after school, on weekends, and in the evenings. These programs serve some of our country's most underserved children and youth in both rural and urban settings. Now, what do the awardees receive? Each of the 12 award-winning programs receives a one-time $10,000 grant, an awards plaque presented at a ceremony in Washington, D.C., and capacity building support and access to communications experts to help programs effectively leverage their award. As the nation's highest honor for the field, the national endorsement of a National Arts and Humanities Youth Program Award adds significantly to the credibility of recipients and leads directly to an increase in an organization's visibility, funding support, and impact. Now, let's take a look at the application details and eligibility criteria. Our annual application typically opens in late November and closes in early February of the following year. The online application is posted on our website, www.nahyp.org, under the How to Apply tab. 2 questions that the President's Committee frequently receives are libraries eligible to submit an application, and what types of library programs qualify? Yes, in short, libraries are eligible applicants. Library programs applying for the award must meet all of the National Arts and Humanities Youth Program Awards eligibility criteria. Before applying, determine if your program is eligible. Qualified programs should be able to answer yes to this following set of questions. Does your program take place outside of the regular school day, and is it not considered part of an in-school curriculum? Is your program well established and has been in place for at least 5 years? Are the arts and/or the humanities at the core of your program offerings? Are underserved children and youth the primary participants in your program? Does your program involve young people as active participants in the arts or the humanities experience? And that pretty much means, are they involved in hands-on activities, or do they participate as part of an audience? Because what we're looking for in that area is that the children are actively engaged in ongoing hands-on experiences. Does your program provide regularly scheduled sessions on an ongoing basis? Does your program focus on child and youth development as an expressed goal? For example, does it enhance leadership skills, self-confidence, and/or peer relations? So let's talk about what makes a strong and compelling application. For the purpose of the National Arts and Humanities Youth Program Award, we define successful applications as those that effectively demonstrate that the nominated program does the following. It provides an experience of sufficient intensity, consistency, and duration. It impacts children's development, education, and/or resiliency. It fosters child and youth development through the approach to the arts and the humanities. It should integrate support services and/or prevention strategies with arts and humanities programming. It uses quality, trained artists, scholars, and writers who are prepared and experienced in working with young people and/or managing the program. And it takes place in a stable and solvent organization. Application narratives should show strong supporting evidence of program impact, provide clear evidence that the majority of youth served are underserved, and include strong evidence of high quality, consistent, hands-on learning opportunities. The President's Committee offers technical assistance to new and returning applicants. New applicants are welcome to reach us as well as making general inquiries. Returning applicants are also welcome to schedule feedback calls. Those requests can be made via email to info@nahyp.org. Once again, that's info@nahyp.org. Now I'd like to invite our federal cultural partners to speak a bit about their respective agencies and the grant opportunities available to library programs serving youth. We'll first begin with my colleague from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, Faith Seal.
Thank you, Tracy. IMLS is the primary source of federal support for the nation's 100,000 libraries and 35,000 museums. We provide leadership through grant making, convening groups, conducting research, publishing, policy development, in order to build capacity of museum and libraries to serve the public. IMLS's vision and mission statements emphasize that IMLS is here to support libraries and museums in serving their communities. The IMLS vision is a democratic society where communities and individuals thrive with broad public access to knowledge, cultural heritage, and lifelong learning. The mission of IMLS is to inspire libraries and museums to advance innovation, learning, and cultural and civic engagement. There are 3 strategic priorities that drive agency-wide grant making. They are learning, community, and content. These will tie in quite closely with our grant programs, but have been themes of our funding for the last few years, and they may be familiar to you if you've applied for grants in the past. The Grants to States program is a program of IMLS that provides grants directly to the state library administrative agencies, mainly known as state libraries, which this includes all the state libraries in the 50 states, the District of Columbia, Virgin Islands, Guam, Puerto Rico, American Samoa, and Northern Mariana Islands. State libraries can be another source of federal funds, as some state libraries make sub-grants available to libraries in their state. But please note, the state library will have their own process and eligibility requirements for applying for their grants, and that all states may not make sub-grants available. Another opportunity that IMLS offers is the National Medal for Museum and Library Service. The National Medal recognizes outstanding libraries and museums that contribute significantly to their communities. Although this is considered an award as opposed to a grant, winners may receive a monetary award from IMLS. Currently, the nominations are open and being accepted through October 2nd. And this year, we're particularly interested in library programs that serve as a catalyst for community change, including services for veterans, military families, at-risk children and families, the and underemployed adults, and youth confronting barriers to STEM-related education. Employment. Now I'll turn it over to my colleague Tim Kerrigan to discuss more about IMLS opportunities.
Great, thank you, Faith. Today I want to share some information with you about two of IMLS's competitive grant programs for libraries. Both of these programs have deadlines for preliminary proposal of September 1st, so coming up very quickly in the next few weeks, but we also anticipate a second deadline on February 1st, 2018 for both of these programs. The first program is our National Leadership Grant for Libraries program, otherwise known as NLG. This program supports projects that address significant challenges or opportunities facing the library and archives field and that have the potential to advance theory and practice. Successful proposals demonstrate broad national impact, address a critical issue facing libraries and archives, incorporate partnerships and collaborations, and show relevant expertise about the topic at hand. The other program that we'll be discussing today is the Laura Bush 21st Century Librarians Program, otherwise known as LB21. This program supports developing a diverse workforce of librarians and information professionals to better meet the changing learning and information needs of the American public by enhancing training and professional development for the library workforce, developing faculty and library leaders, and recruiting and educating the next generation of library professionals. Successful projects in this category demonstrate broad impact, strategic collaborations, and advanced theory and practice of library services. You can find information on the IMLS website for both of these grant programs. That includes program overviews, links to the notices of funding opportunities, and also information about funding caps and corresponding cost-sharing requirements. If we have archived webinar recordings, you can find those there, as well as the contact information for the program staff. We encourage you to reach out to us with questions about the grant program and application process. We're here, and we're happy to help. Briefly, I want to touch on the funding categories within the Laura Bush and NLG programs. Sparks grants are for small, rapid prototyping projects. Those are only offered within NLG and for a period of up to 1 year. Planning grants are for preliminary project activities, such as preliminary research, conducting environmental scans, working on developing partnerships, and sort of developing sort of the initial phases of work that might lead to a larger initiative. Our national forum grants are for convening experts and stakeholders around an issue of national significance for libraries and archives. This might include one large meeting or several smaller meetings focused on a particular area of interest to establish shared agendas or broader field-wide understanding. And our project grants and research grants support implementation projects as well as the investigation of key research questions related to library and archival practice. These projects are ranging from 1 to 3 years. To give you a sense of the scale of funding available in each of the categories, here are the funding limits for each. You'll notice that they vary a bit between the Laura Bush program and the National Leadership Grants Program. There is flexibility within the funding levels, but you should keep in mind that we have limited funding and both programs are highly competitive. Even though the upward cap in both categories is $1 million or $2 million, we realistically have made very few projects at that range. I would say that most grants are in the $250,000 to $500,000 range, and many are even less than that. We see that there's a value proposition that comes into play when we're making our funding decisions. The higher the amount that you're requesting, the more compelling your case must be on how your work will impact the field and represent a significant return on investment. The Notice of Funding Opportunity spells out these caps and provides the corresponding cost-sharing requirements. These are generally one-to-one, but there are some exceptions to that. To give you a sense of how competitive IMLS grant programs are, here are some recent statistics from last year's deadline. And it's worth noting, we use a two-phase application process for these programs, which is maybe a little bit different than what our federal partners do in their programs. Applicants are invited to submit a two-page preliminary proposal that outlines the key concept of their project on the deadline. We put these proposals through peer review, and those deemed best aligned with the programmatic goals and best positioned for success are invited to submit full proposals. An invitation to submit a full proposal is not a guarantee of funding. The full proposals are put through a second round of peer review. So as you'll see, of our applications for NLG, about 43% were invited to submit full proposals and about 46% for the Laura Bush program. Of those that were invited, approximately 2/3 of the NLG applicants and half of the LB21 applicants were awarded grants. So overall, roughly 1/4 of the original applicants for both programs were funded. These numbers vary each year based on the availability of funding, the number of proposals received, and the amount of grant funding requested. But I hope it demonstrates to you that the process can be competitive and that you should plan to invest substantial time in writing your two-page proposal to ensure that it's competitive within the guidelines for the program you selected. We'll share some tips in a little bit to help you put your best foot forward. I'll now invite my colleague Julia from the National Endowment for the Humanities to tell you about some of their funding opportunities.
Thanks, Tim. The National Endowment for the Humanities is a federal agency that makes grants supporting research, education, and public programming in the humanities, as well as the preservation of humanities materials and primary sources. This is a point at which some people may be wondering, what are the humanities? That's actually a really great question because there's often a lot of confusion about what exactly the humanities are, and sometimes it seems like almost everyone has their own idea about the humanities. At the NEH, for the purposes of our grant making, we actually have a definition for the humanities that is defined by our legislation. Basically, the humanities are a set of disciplines that explore the human endeavor, ask the big questions about humans and their societies. And that would include, among others, for example, history, philosophy, literature, languages and linguistics, and also the history, theory, and criticism of the arts. We are also very interested in the ways that the humanities can intersect with other fields like the sciences, the social sciences, business even. Now, this is not by any means an exhaustive list, so if you're not certain whether your idea or your concept falls within the humanities for the purposes of our grant making, you can always reach out to us and we can sort of help you work through that. At NEH, we do have a number of grant programs that might be of interest to libraries. All of the information that I'm going to be talking about can be found on our website, nih.gov, specifically on the grants tab, which is what's showing on the slide here. I'm going to start with our division of preservation and access, and that is the place where I think libraries most typically find funding at NEH. I want to highlight especially the Common Heritage Grant Program. This supports community scanning days that help communities preserve the important materials that are held not in a library or a university archive, but by individuals and families. And we know that families have a lot of resources. It might be your great-grandmother's letters or family recipes or scrapbooks. These all actually are primary sources that help tell the story of a community. So we are interested in helping communities and organizations gather those materials and digitize them so that they can be preserved for the future. A couple of recent grants in the Common Heritage Program include a grant to the Whittier, California Public Library to digitize primary sources related to Whittier's post-World War II history. Also a recent grant to the Meade Public Library in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, to scan documents, photos, and artwork that will form a part of the Recollection Wisconsin Digital Repository. There are a number of other grant programs in preservation and access that I think will be interesting to libraries, specifically the preservation grants that help institutions preserve their own collections. So if you're at a library that has manuscripts or collections of photographs or audiovisual materials, you can get help from our Sustaining Cultural Heritage Collections program as well as our Preservation Assistance Grants program to help you preserve those materials. Very recently, we funded, for example, public libraries in San Jose, California, Gloucester County, New Jersey, and Muhlenberg County, Kentucky, as well as college and university libraries and independent libraries. So we're really interested in helping institutions in various locations across the country and of various sizes. I also want to talk briefly about our division of public programs. We have a grant program in public called Community Conversations. It's part of the Public Humanities Projects program. And Community Conversations supports year-long reading and discussion programs on topics of importance to a community. So this might also be a place where libraries could get involved in hosting these community conversations. And then also you may want to check out NEH on the Road, which provides cultural organizations, including libraries, with traveling exhibitions and setup funds. These are just a few of the grant programs that might be of interest. I encourage you to check out our full range of programs here on the grants tab at nih.gov. I also don't want you to forget about your state humanities council. Every state and U.S. district or territory has a humanities council. These are independent nonprofit institutions that receive a portion of their funding from the NEH. And they are all very active supporters of the humanities within their states or territories. They support a range of different programming types. This could include lecture series, reading and discussion groups, documentary film screenings, Chautauqua events, programming for children and families, programming for teachers, a really wide range. Some of them do also give their own grants. So definitely check out the work of your state council if you're not already involved with them. Now, there are just a few things to keep in mind as you're exploring NEH for possible funding. The first is just to make sure that you find the right grant program. Spend some time here on the Grants tab exploring all of the various programming to make sure that the grant program you apply to is the right program for what you want to do. You can have a great idea, a really strong proposal, but if it's not the right program, it's essentially going to be a waste of your time. If you're having trouble, or if you have any questions about whether what you want to do is supported by a particular program, or if you're having trouble finding the right program for your idea, definitely reach out to NEH staff. And then once you've identified a program, read the guidelines very carefully. All of the guidelines at NEH will include important information about things like eligibility. Most of our programs are open to any 501c3 nonprofit or a component of state, local, or tribal government, but there are a few programs that are more restricted. So the guidelines will tell you about that. They will tell you about any cost sharing or matching requirements. They'll also tell you exactly what information we want you to include in your grant application, as well as the criteria by which your application will be judged. You'll also find with the guidelines sample narratives, sample budgets, and contact information for program staff. And that brings me to the most important thing that you can do if you were looking at NEH funding, and maybe also I think my partners would agree with me on this, and that is to get in touch with program staff. Specifically at NEH, we are very happy to talk with you about your ideas, to give you advice about your application, and in many cases, we can also read and give you feedback on a draft proposal. So definitely take advantage of that help. We are nice people. We answer our phones, we answer our emails, and we really do want to be in conversation with you and help you put forward the best application that you possibly can. So that's just a very brief overview of NEH and what we do. As I said before, all of this and an awful lot more can be found on our website, which is nih.gov. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Tony Tai, from the National Endowment for the Arts.
Thanks, Julia. The National Endowment for the Arts is the independent federal agency whose funding and support gives Americans the opportunity to participate in the arts, exercise their imaginations, and develop their creative capacities. For more than 50 years now, the NEA has supported performances, exhibitions, festivals, and other arts projects throughout the nation. I prefer the vision statement. We envision a nation in which every American benefits from arts engagement and every community recognizes and celebrates its aspirations and achievements through the arts. Our guidelines will be on our website, which is arts.gov, usually at the end of December or early in January, depending, of course, on the federal budget situation. We have three major categories of support. And it's the middle one, artworks, is in fact the largest category of Endowment. It supports creation, engagement, learning, and livability projects in a wide variety of disciplines, including, for example, arts education, literature, museums and design, music, theater, media arts. But the ones we listed there are ones that might be of particular interest to libraries. There are two annual deadlines, usually in February and July. The second category of support is Challenge America, which is designed to extend the reach of arts to underserved communities. That can include, for example, geography, ethnicity, economics, or disability. There are three types of projects that are supported by Challenge America. They can be events with a guest artist, so that funds go generally for the artist's fees, or public art or cultural tourism. So if you have a performing arts series, you could consider applying under that, for instance, or if you wish to have a piece of public art on your premises, that might be another possibility. Those grants are $10,000. The deadline is in April, and unlike our other categories, you apply for the $10,000 figure, and they are matching grants, so your project cost has to be $20,000 or more, and you are either funded or not funded. In the other categories, you apply for whatever you think you need or might get, and it's occasionally panels will give a different number, and you'll have to adjust your budget. The third category is our town, which is the top one, arts and culture-driven community development, place-based projects, investments. The term of art that's evolved in the last few years is creative placemaking. It's a little bit of jargony now, but it's an effort overall to infuse the arts into the general life of a community. And that can include public art, festivals, planning, design. It requires partnerships and between at least a nonprofit organization and a unit of government, usually a city or county. Those are very large grants by our standards, and they vary pretty widely. Well worth checking out. It does take more work in terms of getting the partnership put together and submitting the application. So that's sort of the good news. The libraries are, of course, eligible for support from the Arts Endowment. The not so good news is that we don't give too many grants to libraries. We've given in almost 20 years, we've given about 120 or so grants to libraries, but in all candor, there's a few big ones that scoop up the bulk of the money. So it's really about half. So it's 3 to 4 libraries get a grant from the Arts Endowment, other than the big ones, like the New York Public Library. About 3 to 4 in a year out of more than 2,000 grants. So the other question then, it begs the question about how many libraries apply. And I couldn't find an answer to that question. Let's just leave it hanging out there. If there's something here that you think you might be eligible for, then it's worth pursuing. I'd like to mention 2 other things we haven't mentioned before. There's a program called the Big Read, which would be familiar to libraries, since the American Library Association was crucial in its early development. And essentially, it's book reading clubs. The Arts Endowment picks a series of books for possible inclusion in by book reading clubs. And I think we give about 70 or so a year. Those are not awarded by the Arts Endowment. It's through a cooperative with Arts Midwest, so they don't show up on our website. So that's worth checking out. I think the website is literally bigread.org, or you can check with Arts Midwest. And the other is our Poetry Out Loud program, which is poetry recitation, a national contest, which culminates in well, there are state-by-state contests, and then there's a national competition here in D.C. And you may have, maybe if you have programs for youth and some of them you like reciting, that's certainly something to think about. I'd point out too that our website has a feature called Recent Grant Search. It's well worth taking a look. If you have a project idea, it's well worth putting some keywords in and seeing what pops up. And that'll give you a feel for what, if anything, like what you're thinking about has gotten an award from us. I'd also like to plug, as Julia did, the state equivalents of ourselves, the state arts agencies. There are state arts agencies in every state. Again, well worth checking out. And most of them, if not all, have an arts education person whose interest would obviously be youth. And that might be a logical first contact for your library. Then finally, I would echo, well, 2 things. One is, perhaps it's worth thinking about partnerships. with an arts organization that might want to do programming in your library. So you might not be the grantee, but you might have events in your facility that are beneficiaries of a grant from us. I would encourage you, to read the guidelines. Sometimes that's I find it a little more challenging now that they're strictly on the web. I'm old-fashioned, I like the book format. But take a look at them, see what there might be a connection, and then do email or call a program specialist in that area. Don't do that 2 weeks before an application deadline. Do it well in advance to see and to float an idea, and they'll give you a reasonable response as to what previous experience is. Panelists who review the application change every year, so you never know. So I think that's what I wanted to say. And our next, we're going to move on to discussing tips on applying to any of our agencies. And I think Tim's going to take over.
Yes, thank you, Tony. So some of these tips are going to seem very practical and common sense, and yet at the same time, these are things that we see applicants getting tripped up over year after year and deadline after deadline. So to help you put your best foot forward, we just want to remind you of some of these things. But before we jump into that, we want to talk about 3 places where your organization must be registered in order to be able to submit and receive federal funding: DUNS, SAM, and grants.gov. If you're considering applying for a federal grant, we strongly recommend checking to make sure that your organization is registered with all 3 of these and that your registration is active, as they do expire and it can take some time to update and renew them. First, your organization will need a DUNS number, the Data Universal Number System number. This is a unique identification for your organization similar to a Social Security number. You'll also need to be registered with the Systems for Award Management, or SAM. It's important to keep in mind that your SAM registration is good for 1 year and must be renewed. This is something you don't want to be doing right before a deadline, so it's important to check your status early on. I'm guessing that many of you on this call are sort of programming librarians and probably not the people in your organization that would be doing this function, so we encourage you to contact the right person at your organization if it's someone in development or finance, or if your library has a friends group or a foundation that would be applying on your behalf. You just want to make sure that all that is in place. And if you have any experience with federal grants previously, you might be familiar with CCR. SAM replaced CCR a handful of years ago. Finally, you'll need an account with grants.gov, which is the portal through which you will submit your application. IMLS recommends that the registration process for grants.gov can take up to 2 weeks. And even if you know that your organization is registered with grants.gov, it's important to make sure you know who on your team is authorized and to make sure they have their current login information. Lots of people take medical leave or move on to new jobs, and suddenly the login is missing, and it can cause heartache. So we'd like for you to be able to avoid that. So if you don't know for sure that you have any of those registrations in place and you think you want to be moving into federal grants, we'd recommend checking on this as soon as possible. It's not something you want to be doing anywhere near the deadline. Moving into the content of your proposal, we have several things that we could recommend that you would do to ensure you are submitting the most competitive version of your proposal. And one of them you're already doing. You're participating in this webinar today, which is a great introduction to programs offered by IMLS, NEA, NIH, and the President's Committee. Some agencies may also offer program-specific webinars when new notices of funding opportunity are released. So it's good to look into that when you see a funding opportunity available. That's something IMLS does, I know. The next thing you want to do that Julia touched on was that you'll want to make sure that the grant program and category that you select is best aligned with your idea. If there's not good alignment, you're unlikely to be successful, and you'll probably have invested significant time in the process of applying. So it's really important to make sure that there's a good match between your idea and the goals of the program. Tony recommended looking at the descriptions of previously funded projects to get some ideas of what has been successful in the past. I think all three of our agencies have databases of funded projects, and you can look across agency at usaspending.gov. You may also find that there are full model proposals available, as well as sort of brief descriptions if you're wanting to learn more about sort of not only the content of funded proposals, but sort of the format as well. We would all encourage you to seek technical assistance from your program officers. Program officers are available to discuss ideas, and at certain agencies might be able to review drafts to various degrees. So be sure to ask how they can help you, and they are happy to do so. They want to see you be successful. As you're writing your proposal, be sure to clearly articulate the goals of your project and the work plan for achieving those goals. And we highly recommend having a colleague unfamiliar with your project read through the proposal prior to submitting it. We all get too close to our work. I know I'm guilty of this, and sometimes miss problems that other people who are seeing it for the first time might be able to help point out to us. You want to make sure you're clearly communicating your idea and putting that best foot forward. Also, you want to be sure you're catching typos, misspellings, arithmetic errors, as these can distract peer reviewers and cause them to view the proposal as sloppy and less competitive. Related to these things, you want to be sure you've got the right team in place that has the expertise necessary to carry out the project successfully, and that the budget you're requesting appropriately supports the project plan you've articulated. Lastly, this is a really time-consuming process, which probably involves multiple members of your team. So it's best to start early and keep in mind that in fairness to all applicants, we can only make grants to eligible applicants that submit complete proposals on or before the stated deadline. So with that, I think we're going to transition to Q&A, and Tracy's going to facilitate that.
Yes, thank you, Tim. That was very helpful. Well, let's see. We have quite a few questions, and I think we have enough time to address a couple. The first question is, do you have any advice, and this is for the NEH and the NEA, do you have any advice for a library applying for an NEA or NEH grant for the first time, particularly if they're not sure where to start?
I'll go first.
Sure.
Actually, I'll echo much of what Julia said previously, and Tim as well. Read the guidelines. So you're asking questions based on knowledge. Do the recent grant search. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to even suggest talk to the state equivalent, the State Humanities Council, the State Arts Agency. I know that sounds kind of crazy. Talk to the state folks about the national folks. But they tend to get familiar with the funding process, and they might give you some tips too. And then do not hesitate to email or call the appropriate program specialist. But as Tim was saying, not too close to the application deadline, because number one, you need time to adjust if you're going to apply. And number two, the closer you get to the application deadline, the more harried the program specialist. So you want to start early. You really do want to start early and make that connection. If that's another one, is if you can identify either another entity, another organization, a library or a similar organization that has received funding, it's not a bad idea to check in with them, whether they're in your community or they've done a project similar to what you are interested in doing. And then last but not least, don't give up. The reviewers change. Mm-hmm. Sometimes even focuses of programs change. Read the guidelines every year. And do not necessarily ask for feedback if you get rejected. Again, not right after the deadline, but do ask for it. and then get a feel for, where you're horribly off base and it's not worth trying again. But if you get a feel that you were near, then by all means, apply again.
I agree with all of that. The only things that I would add that may or may not be specific to NIH, one is that when you are getting in touch with program staff at NIH, we are a small place. We all know each other and we all know what we do. So if you're not quite sure which person to reach out to, just call or email somebody. If say you get in touch with me and I'm not the right person, I don't work with that particular program, I know who does, and so I can put you in the right direction. So don't feel even that you need to know who you need to reach out to. Just get in touch with someone and we can point you in the right direction. The other thing that I would add is that for all of NIH's grant programs, on the guidelines page, we do include sample proposals. These are actually funded proposals that have been through the peer review process. They can be a great help to a first-time applicant. Obviously, you don't want to follow exactly what that successful applicant did, but they give you a very good sense of how a successful applicant makes a case for their project, how they put all of the pieces of the proposal together, and what a really strong proposal looks like. So don't overlook those sample proposals. They can be really, really helpful.
Mm-hmm. And make sure that any instructions as to how to apply, that you follow them carefully. Remember, reviewers are looking at any number of applications and they get tired too. And they don't want to have to fish if you put something in the wrong place or not put it in the right place, not put it in. So be careful that you follow the directions. More is not necessarily better. And then the question for Julia, do you think better the first contact by email or by phone?
I personally prefer email because it gives me a chance to sort of look around and find, if I'm not the right person, it gives me a chance to look around and make sure that I am pointing you to the right person. But I'm perfectly happy with phone calls too.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, our next question is, if I receive NIH, IMLS, or NEA funding, may I also accept funding from other sources? And I think to qualify that, may I also accept federal funding from other sources?
The answer is yes. You can't use federal funds to match other federal funds, but you can receive federal funds from different agencies. I'd like to point out that if you had been a part of the previous webinars, or if not, we had Santa Ana on, which was a previous NAHIP winner, and they also previously won the national medal from IMLS as well. So yes, that's perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of it has to do with beyond what Faith said, which I would echo. The cost sharing, just making sure that you're sort of keeping the buckets of federal funds separate and discrete from each other. And also noting that a lot of it has to do with sort of your institutional capacity to manage multiple federal awards simultaneously, and to sort of comply with all of the many requirements that accepting taxpayer dollars entails. And we tell you that not to scare you, but because it's an important part of this. So you want to be sure that you're in good standing in terms of reporting and performance on awards, and you want to make sure that you're not getting yourself disbarred by that sort of bad grant management behavior, which rarely happens but can prevent you from seeking additional funding in the future. So.
One thing that we have not talked about, but if you could just very briefly touch upon, is reporting and what it means to be in good standing with a federal agency if you are a grantee. Anyone want to jump in?
I'll jump in for NIH. We have two types of reporting. One is the performance report, where we will ask you to discuss your progress on your project, any changes that may have been made from the application that you submitted, which we expect will be minimal and will not change the scope of the project. And then the other reporting component is the financial report, where you will report on your expenditures of financial funds. How many reports you will be required to submit officially in terms of performance reporting will depend on the length of the project. A one-year project, there may only be a final performance report and a final financial report. We have a number of multi-year projects, 3 or more years. Those will have annual or even semi-annual performance reports. So it really is going to vary based on the project and what you're doing. Anyone else?
Very similar to IMLS.
You know, we do have people that check on that, and where you get hurt is that there will be a little asterisk next to your organizational name, and it would prevent a second grant.
Yep.
Yeah.
If you don't need the reporting one.
I think we have time for just one more question. Can you provide feedback on prior denied applications?
Mm-hmm. Yes. At NIH, we encourage applicants to always request the reviewer's comments. They will receive their reviewer's comments verbatim, with the reviewer's name obviously not attached to the comments, but they can be extremely helpful in revising and then resubmitting a proposal. The other thing that I would say is that we encourage successful applicants to get their reviewers' comments as well. Very frequently, reviewers have suggestions, even for really strong applications that end up getting funded. They can have the reviewers often have suggestions for minor tweaks that can improve an already strong project. So whether you're successful or not, absolutely get your reviewers' comments, and then schedule a phone call with a program officer to discuss those comments.
Great. Well, thank you. I think that will conclude our Q&As. And so, on behalf of the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the National Endowment for the Arts, I'd like to thank you for your time and interest today. I hope we managed to shed some light on the federal funding opportunities for library programs like yours, and provided some tips that are helpful as you search, identify, and apply for a federal grant. Thank you again for tuning into our 3-part summer series on creative youth development. If you missed a session, you can find archived recordings of Part 1 and Part 2, and now Part 3 on the YALSA website. Thanks again, and have a great day.